In the midst of a deeply personal segment on his television program, Steve Harvey was the recipient of a startling and poignant message from Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso, the communication laden with reverence, admiration, and unvarnished emotion, completely unraveled Harvey, moving him to tears on a live broadcast. This exceptional and potent moment resonated with millions as two prominent figures engaged in a profound, unscripted exchange of feelings. Steve Harvey had stepped onto the stage of his talk show, adorned with his customary brilliant smile. The crowd's applause and cheers filled the studio, and Steve, brimming with his usual vitality, began to explore the day's theme, the significance of having a purpose. It was intended to be a routine segment. He had just concluded a personal anecdote about the hardships of his impoverished youth when a member of the production crew strode purposefully to the stage, murmuring something into Steve's ear. Steve's expression shifted from confusion to surprise, and then he fell silent. Addressing the camera, he cleared his throat and announced, "Well, folks, I've just been informed that there is a very special message for me, and it originates from a place I would have never imagined." Burkina Faso, the large screen behind him, illuminated with a golden insignia and the prominent text. A message from President Ibrahim Traoré. A profound silence descended upon the studio. Not a single cough or whisper could be heard. Steve, now visibly unsettled, gazed at the camera and uttered softly, "Why on earth would the President of Burkina Faso be sending a message to me? I have no idea what this is even about." He took a seat, his attention fixed on the screen as the video commenced. The footage started with a serene, inviting setting, a modest wooden desk with the flag of Burkina Faso positioned behind it. A man with intense eyes and a gentle voice. Appeared, it was President Ibrahim Traoré. Steve leaned in, his grip tightening on the arms of his chair. Mr. Steve Harvey, the president, started speaking English with a subtle African intonation. "I am addressing you not merely as a head of state, but as a brother." Everyone in the studio audience leaned forward, captivated. "You are not acquainted with me, but we are certainly acquainted with you," Traoré went on. "In the hamlets of Burkina Faso, your voice carries much farther than you might realize. Your messages of resilience, belief, and second chances have resonated with individuals you will never have the chance to meet." Steve blinked, utterly astounded. A slight tremor began in his hands. Traoré's voice grew thick with emotion. "During our most desperate times, when conflict jeopardized our tranquility, your personal story provided me with hope. You served as a reminder that true leadership isn't found in titles, but in purpose and in heart." The room was enveloped in absolute quiet. Then Traoré looked straight into the camera's lens. From a soldier who ascended to guide his nation, to a young boy who once possessed nothing in America, he declared, "I extend my gratitude to you." Steve's lips moved, but no sound emerged. All that appeared was the start of tears. For the first time in a very long while, Steve Harvey was at a loss for words. He reached for a handkerchief as the message proceeded. "I have observed you weeping for others, sharing laughter with strangers, and offering help to those who felt they had been forgotten." Traoré's voice resonated. "In my nation, we recognize that kind of spirit. We refer to it as a heart of the sun, warm, courageous, and a source of light." Steve finally managed to whisper, "Wow." The president paused for a moment before adding, "This communication is not of a political nature. It is of a personal one. I recognize in you the narrative of a man who refused to surrender, and it inspires me to never surrender on behalf of my people." The message concluded with Traoré speaking a phrase in Moor, the indigenous language of Burkina Faso. Steve turned to his staff, his voice breaking. What was it that he said at the end? A nearby translator stood up and answered with a gentle tone. He said, "Even the most resilient man requires a reminder that his voice continues to hold weight." Steve buried his face in his hands. The audience was weeping. The cameraman's hands were visibly shaking. This transcended a mere television moment. It was an instance of souls connecting across continents, shared struggles, and a sense of brotherhood. And it was only the beginning. Steve sat in quiet contemplation, his hands clasped and his eyes glistening. The audience waited patiently, but he was unable to speak. A profound truth, a sense of connection, a feeling of being truly seen, had deeply affected his spirit. After a moment of silence, Steve looked up. "You know," he began, "you never imagine that your words travel so far. You're just trying to be authentic, trying to make it, trying to be of service." The audience offered a soft round of applause, but Steve raised his hand to quiet them. "This isn't about applause," he stated. "This is about purpose." Behind the scenes, the producers were considering a break for commercials. Steve would not allow it. "I want the entire world to witness every single second of this. Do not cut the feed." Then, as the cameras focused closely on Steve, a second surprise unfolded. A live feed. The screen flickered, and suddenly, President Ibrahim Traoré was visible. On screen, this time not in a pre-recorded video, Steve let out a gasp. "Mr. Harvey," Traoré said with a gentle smile, "for a change, permit me to speak with you, man to man, not from one nation to another, but from one dreamer to another." The studio, once again, fell into a hush. A tempest of emotion was gathering, and no one was prepared for what the president was about to share. Traoré leaned closer to the camera, his voice soft and genuine. "You perceive me today as a president," he stated. "But I was once a boy without any shoes. I walked to school on bare feet. I transported my books, tied together with a piece of string. And for many nights, I fell asleep hungry." Steve bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as he fought back tears. The president went on, "As a teenager, I witnessed war firsthand. I saw individuals surrender to despair, but I also witnessed people rise above it." He paused, then shared an unexpected detail. "One afternoon, in a busy internet cafe, I came across a video of you. Don't give up. I couldn't comprehend all of your words, but I comprehended your tears, your fervor, your suffering, and your hope." Steve looked up, astonished. "You helped a young boy in Burkina Faso to believe he could transcend his pain, and that boy grew up to be me." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Tears were now streaming down the faces of some. Traoré offered a gentle smile. "So, when I heard your voice, just last week, discussing the importance of purpose, I knew it was time for me to say something in return." Steve covered his face, and it was at that moment that Traoré uttered something even Steve found incredible. President Traoré took a deep breath and looked directly at the camera. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "you once mentioned your desire to visit Africa, not merely as a celebrity, but as a brother, as someone with a wish to contribute." Steve nodded, whispering, "Yes, I did." While Traoré smiled, "I wish to extend a personal invitation to you to come to Burkina Faso. Not for the sake of cameras or publicity, but for you to witness what your voice has silently cultivated." The studio audience gasped in unison. "You have contributed to uplifting spirits across oceans. Now, allow me to reveal the seeds you have sown in our land." Steve's hands trembled. He was uncertain whether to speak or to weep. Then came the words that finally broke his composure. "There is a small orphanage in Ouagadougou. The children in that place know you by name. They use your words in their prayers. They find joy in your humor. But most importantly, they have come to believe they are important because you were important." Steve got to his feet, his eyes brimming with tears. The audience rose with him, clapping gently, many dabbing at their own eyes, but Traoré had not concluded. He gazed into the lens and added, "In 7 days, they will convene in the village square, anticipating the arrival of the man whose words traversed oceans and mended hearts." The countdown was now underway. The very next morning found Steve already packing his bags. There were no cameras, no alerts to the media. It was just him, a single carry-on bag, and a spirit filled with questions. The world was abuzz with the news. Major media outlets all featured the headlines. "President of Burkina Faso moves Steve Harvey to tears." A message that spanned continents, but Steve was not undertaking this journey for the world's attention. He was doing it for the children, for that voice that had resonated with his soul. As his aircraft crossed the Atlantic, he gazed out the window. His thoughts drifted to his own upbringing. The poverty of his childhood in Cleveland, the evenings when they had no food, the periods when his aspirations felt impossibly large. And now, here he was, on a flight to Africa, summoned by a president who had once known the same kind of suffering. He whispered to himself, "God, why me?" He had no idea what he would find. Would the children even know who he was? Would he possess the fortitude to meet them? Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood before a group of children in a courtyard bathed in sunlight. He smiled and announced he is on his way. The children erupted in joyous screams, but one small girl at the back had tears in her eyes. She clutched a small notebook. Inside it, she had composed a letter to Steve Harvey. Her name was Aïcha. She was just 10 years old, petite, with a quiet voice and a wisdom that belied her age. In her hand, the notebook quivered slightly as she whispered to her caregiver, "Will he read it? Will he even care?" The caregiver smiled, kneeling down to her level. "He has already cared more than most people ever will." Aïcha's letter was not lengthy, but it contained a universe of suffering. "Dear Mr. Steve, my name is Aïcha. My papa passed away 2 years ago. My mama is unwell. I sometimes cry in the night, but one day someone showed us your video. You said you were put on this earth to do something great. I took your words to heart. Thank you for speaking to us, even though you didn't realize we were listening. I hope you will smile when you meet us. Your little sister, Aïcha." As the sun dipped below the horizon in Ouagadougou, children rehearsed songs. Others created drawings decorated with his name. An atmosphere of hope was palpable, but Aïcha remained quiet, seated by the mango tree, her notebook held tightly to her chest. In that moment, this was not about celebrity or international relations. It was about a man who had once been homeless, living in his car, coming to meet a child who often went to bed without a meal. And the sky itself seemed to murmur they were destined to find one another. The airplane landed on a dusty airstrip, just past noon. Steve Harvey emerged, using his hand to shield his eyes from the intense sunlight. There were no paparazzi, no elaborate procession, only a handful of guards, 2 translators, and a young aide holding a simple sign that read, "Welcome, Brother Steve." His heart pounded in his chest. Inside a nearby vehicle, he was chauffeured through the streets. He saw humble dwellings, modest, marketplaces, and children waving as he went by. When they arrived at the orphanage gates, he was unprepared for the sight that greeted him. More than 100 children had assembled, brandishing handmade signs with messages like, "You matter. Thank you, Mr. Steve, and we love you." Tears welled up in his eyes. President Traoré came forward, not in a formal suit, but in a plain white shirt and traditional attire. He embraced Steve in a tight hug. "Welcome home," he said. Steve was unable to utter a word. Then, a small voice called out from the gathering, "Steve, Steve." It was Aïcha. She approached him slowly, the notebook held in her trembling hands. She extended it toward him. "This is for you," she whispered. He knelt down, opened the letter, and read it in silence. And then he wept, openly and without restraint. And every single person present understood that this was not merely a visit. It was a divinely orchestrated encounter. Backstage, during a brief interlude for commercials, Steve remained seated, motionless. The broadcast of President Ibrahim Traoré's message had just concluded. A producer came to him holding a sheet of paper, an English translation of the entire message. "Steve, you're going to want to see this part," she whispered gently, passing it to him. Steve's eyes deliberately traced the words. "When I was a young boy, hiding beneath the wooden table of my grandmother's stall in the market, I would hear her laugh as she listened to your voice on a crackling radio. She did not speak English, but your spirit brought a smile to her face in the midst of difficult days. That voice played a part in raising me." Steve pressed his hand to his mouth. His voice broke. "Oh my God!" The cameras were live again, but Steve could not muster a counterfeit smile. He looked into the lens and whispered, "This world. It's more intimate than we realize, and our words, they journey farther than we could ever comprehend." He wiped away a tear as the audience sat in a state of stunned silence. Little did Steve know, this was merely the prelude to something immensely greater. The segment finished, Steve exited the stage, still clutching the translated letter. He was scheduled to proceed with the next guest, but an internal force resisted. He went into his dressing room, phone in hand, and called his producer. "Get me a connection to Ouagadougou. I need to speak with President Traoré today." The producer, taken aback, stammered, Yes, sir. I'll get on it immediately." 2 hours later, a secure video link was established, and there he was, President Ibrahim Traoré, composed, unassuming, his eyes reflecting the burden of a nation and the warmth of a brother. Steve looked at him, his voice unsteady. "Mr. President, I'm just a comedian from Cleveland. I never conceived that my voice would ever reach someone of your stature." Traoré smiled with kindness. "And I am just a soldier with a deep love for his people. But even soldiers require hope. You provided me with that. Now, I wish to offer something in return." Steve leaned forward. "What is it you mean?" Traoré said softly. "Come to Burkina Faso. For just a single day, there is someone I want you to meet." Steve froze. He was completely unaware that this one sentence was about to alter the course of his life forever. Steve hardly slept that night. The president's invitation replayed endlessly in his thoughts. Yet, it was one particular sentence from the letter that truly haunted him. "That voice played a part in raising me." He reflected on his own mother, the woman who had instilled in him the belief that he could amount to something. Steve also recalled something else. Many years prior, during a challenging phase in his career, he had prayed, "God, if you ever allow me to become famous, let my words hold meaning for someone who genuinely needs them." And now, this had happened. That evening, Steve returned to the air for a short-lived broadcast, not with jokes or a monologue, but with a profound truth he could no longer contain. He held up the translated letter for the camera to see. "Y'all, I have been blessed with fame, with money, with success, but this message from a leader I have never met. This letter from a boy who was raised by a grandmother who couldn't understand my words, but could feel my spirit. That is God." He paused. "I made a promise once, and I intend to keep it." Steve made his choice then and there. He was going to Burkina Faso, not for a television show, not for ratings, but for a reason far more profound. Steve boarded the private jet to Ouagadougou with a heavy heart and a receptive mind. It was his inaugural visit to Burkina Faso. He brought no cameras, no press entourage, just his assistant, a translator, and a single journal that had lain untouched for years. As the plane ascended, Steve sat by the window, rereading the translated letter. He had underlined one line in red ink. "I wish my mother could have seen the man you helped me become." The words resonated in his mind like a song. He leaned back and whispered to himself, "What have I done to be worthy of this honor?" Mid-flight, his assistant gave him a small envelope sealed with wax. It was from President Traoré. Inside, a handwritten note read, "When you arrive, do not think like a celebrity. Think like a son returning home." Steve held the letter to his chest. He was uncertain of what awaited him on the other side, but deep within, he sensed that this journey was not just about one man's gratitude. It was about mending something that had been buried deep inside both of them, something the cameras had never witnessed. Steve arrived in Burkina Faso just as the sun was beginning its ascent. The airport was tranquil. No throngs of people, no reporters, just a convoy of 2 black SUVs and a single tall soldier standing near the door. President Ibrahim Traoré himself. Steve descended the aircraft steps slowly, unsure of what to say. But Traoré approached and did something unforeseen. He embraced him as one would a brother. There were no words, just a prolonged, silent hug. Steve's eyes welled with tears. "You came," Traoré said with simplicity. "I had to," Steve answered. They drove in silence through the dusty streets. Children waved from the side of the road, some holding hand-drawn signs bearing Steve's name. Their initial destination, however, was not the presidential palace. It was a small, weathered marketplace with rows of wooden tables laden with fruits, spices, and textiles. Traoré led Steve to the very rear. "This," he said, indicating a collapsed stall, "belonged to my grandmother. It was right here that I would listen to you on the radio while I helped her count coins." Steve looked down at the ground, rendered speechless. The president knelt, picked up a small stone, and placed it in Steve's hand. This is where the hope began. Steve could no longer contain his emotions. He wept silently, and so did Traoré, then guided Steve to a modest village an hour's drive from the capital. As their vehicle came to a halt, a group of women waited beneath a tree. One of them, elderly and moving with deliberation, stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. "This is Aïcha," Traoré explained. "She is the last one alive who used to sit with my grandmother on market days. She remembers you." Steve appeared bewildered. But how? Traoré smiled. They did not comprehend your English, but they could feel your happiness. Aïcha used to say that man possesses a heart that speaks more loudly than his tongue. Aïcha moved closer. The translator gently conveyed her words. You made the difficult days seem more bearable. My sister, she said, referring to his grandmother, used to say your voice gave her the fortitude to continue selling when she felt like giving up. Steve knelt, tears streaming down his face again. Aïcha placed her hand on his cheek and whispered something softly and more. The translator's voice caught as she relayed the message. She said, My sister would have fed you had she met you. She would have called you her son. In that instant, Steve Harvey was not a celebrity. He was a son being received by a mother he never knew he possessed, and the world looked on, speechless. That evening, Steve was a guest at a small school, where children were waiting to give a special performance. There were no cameras or stage lights, only the soft beat of drums and the nervous expressions on little faces. As Steve walked in, the children began to sing a simple melody in Moor, the local language. The translator leaned in and whispered, It is a song President Traoré's grandmother used to hum while she cooked at her market stall. Now these children sing it in her memory. Steve froze. It was the same tune he had been humming days before, without understanding its origin. Tears filled his eyes. I know this, Steve whispered. My own grandma in Cleveland. She used to hum something very similar when I would cry. Traoré stood next to him, his arms gently crossed. Our grandmothers, they offered us the same solace from thousands of miles away. Steve sat down on a dusty bench, encircled by the children. One girl presented him with a wooden carving of two hands cradling a heart. He broke down completely, weeping loudly, releasing years of pain and unanswered questions in a place he never anticipated. The boy from Ohio and the boy from Ouagadougou, now two grown men, had discovered a connection that no script could ever create. The world no longer saw celebrities only to sons who missed their grandmothers. Before Steve's flight back, President Traoré requested one final meeting, this time at a small parcel of land just outside the capital. It was a peaceful spot with a single tree in the center, surrounded by sunflowers. Traoré handed Steve a rolled-up certificate, bound with a red ribbon. This land, he declared, is now yours. It is a place of peace, a gift from the people of Burkina Faso, so that whenever you feel weary or lost, you have a home to return to. Here, Steve shook his head slowly, feeling overwhelmed. I didn't come here for a gift. I came because your letter made me feel human again. Traoré nodded. And you made my people feel seen. That is more valuable than gold. They stood in silence beneath the tree, the wind gently brushing their faces. Then, Traoré did something no one foresaw. He knelt and placed his hand over Steve's heart. I do not kneel for many, he said, but I kneel for hearts that transform lives. Steve sank to his knees as well, and there, together, two powerful men cried like young boys who missed their grandmothers and had found each other through their shared pain. The following day, Steve's return to the U.S. was met with quietude. He requested no fanfare, no cameras, no spectacle, but something within him had shifted. On his next broadcast, before the show began, Steve walked onto the stage carrying the wooden carving the children had given him, the one with two hands holding a heart. He placed it carefully on his desk. Then he looked into the camera. In my lifetime, I have been given many awards, many gifts, but none compared to this. His voice cracked. I met a man, a president, not just of a nation, but of the human heart. Ibrahim Traoré reminded me of something I had forgotten, that love, honor, and memory are more powerful than anything fame can offer. He paused. He called me a son of Africa. I call him my brother. And then Steve did something extraordinary. He played the recording of the children's song live on air. There was no translation, just pure, innocent voices. Millions watched, and millions wept. Comments poured in from every part of the globe. People did not see politics. They saw love. They saw legacy. They saw healing. Dear viewers, if this narrative has touched your heart in any way, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a single word in the comments below. Healed. Let us share this feeling with the entire world. One story, one tear, one heart at a time.